Much, Michael. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll turn to those of you out there to probably ask tougher questions, I sort of hope. But let me start by saying how important it is to the development community to hear you say, investments, not just assistance, trade, not just aid. There are a lot of people here in the room from the multilaterals, from the embassies, certainly from CGD. We've been trying to make this point, and it's great to have it coming from the White House. It's a lot of what you're talking about is terrific. In particular, this national alliance with the 50 on agriculture, with the 50 private corporations involved, and so on, and the East Africa Trade Initiative. And I can't help saying, because yesterday or today we're releasing a report on the U.S. approach in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, the problems of security and the complications of governance in that country have completely, in my view, overwhelmed, or let's say undermined, the ability of the U.S. to stick with some kind of a serious strategy on growth and development over the long haul. It's a tough situation. So let me ask quickly about going from vision, which is excellent, I think we could all applaud it, to implementation when there are bumps in the road. There is the security issue emerging in West Africa. There are issues of governance. There's a healthy emphasis in the note. You didn't talk about it as much, but it's there in the strategy on building democratic institutions. In Ethiopia, we observe a gradual deterioration in many respects in the way those institutions are operating. Could you give us, and my concern looking at what has happened in Pakistan is understanding where will be the development voice? Is it in the White House, who will work with others in the foreign policy security communities on when there are trade-offs between short-term security and other imperatives and a medium-term strategy like this one? Could you just say a word about this issue of this great vision to what actually happens, implementation? Who will be in charge?
You are. Well, first of all, thank you. And let me make the general point and then answer your question specifically. I entirely agree that vision without implementation is meaningless. And so our focus is entirely on how do we take the various visions out there and ensure that there is on-the-ground specific progress towards implementation. That was the goal of this trip. That's the goal of the follow-up effort. And there's already, as I mentioned, on food security, there's been some good progress on global health, good progress. OPIC is taking steps to invest in things. We want to do more and more specific things to show that these concepts have proof and to institutionalize them in the countries in the region. I think in terms of how do we make sure that this stays on track, one thing that's absolutely clear, and it's come out through the development of the Presidential Policy Directive on Global Development and all the work since, is that there is coherent and cohesive view across the government about the importance of this approach. And whether it's Raj Shah, USAID, who's doing remarkable work to strengthen that institution and to manage it to have ultimate impact, Secretary Clinton at the State Department, Secretary Geithner at Treasury, plus the specialized agencies. I mentioned in 1998 we took the private sector to Africa with us. It was Elizabeth Littlefield when she was at JP Morgan. Now she runs OPIC.
Maybe that's why.
And she's had a tremendous impact there, and they're doing fantastic work there. So it is having this whole of government approach with each that the agencies have to offer to ensure that we're keeping the focus here. The impact that a security situation can have on development, as you say, is significant. And can, bearing in mind that without some semblance of physical security, it's really very hard in any country to do anything. That where we can do work and institutionalize it and get out in the field and ensure that the networks are there, that's exactly what we will do. Where there are security challenges, we'll adjust our programs accordingly. But one thing that is heartening is that even where there are security challenges, the fact that the governments themselves want to stay focused on the development agenda, want to keep their focus on the longer term strategies, gives us a partner to work with and allows us to put in place programs that can have that impact working through them and with them with that objective in mind.
Great. Okay, let's go out there. I'll eschew further questions. Let's hear the... Yes, go ahead.
I'm Jutta Hennig from Inside U.S. Trade. I had a very near-term question on AGOA and a further-reaching one. When I was not quite clear, I couldn't hear the colloquy you were talking about on the Senate floor. Is that setting the stage for passage before the August recess or after? And in the longer term, when you were talking about the seamless renewal of AGOA based on what works and doesn't work, is there a formal review, an informal review, and who is in charge of that in terms of determining what changes, if any, you want to seek in the program as it is expiring in 2015?
Let me add to that. I mean, I don't know where things are. I haven't followed it, but many years ago we were saying extend it for more years, that every 5 years or whatever it is, it's very short. It's not creating the environment for investors that is ideal. Go for 10 years or indefinite. Why not permanent unless for eligible countries unless something happens?
Actually, on the second phase of far-reaching, how can a program like that make a difference in the midst of the challenges that you have described, albeit in a very diplomatic way?
If you're here, you're missing the real story on Capitol Hill. So you really ought to go up
Right.
there. That's where the news is being made on trade today. I see. I always think you're the only one. It is. You always get the scoops. You'll have to read the colloquy for yourself, but clearly there's been a lot of very good movement. Chairman Baucus with his committee and working with the leadership, we think we have a path forward, and I'll just refer you to their comments, which should be soon forthcoming in terms of how this might proceed. I think on AGOA, generally, we have until 2015 when it expires to renew it. We understand the importance of there not being a gap between when it expires and when it's renewed. And we want to take some time during this, between now and 2015, to consult with stakeholders, to consult with partners in the region, consult with Capitol Hill, to get a better understanding of how it's working and to answer those sorts of questions in terms of duration and the nature of the access. So we have some time, and we'll create, as USTR does, an interagency process in consultation with external stakeholders and very much closely with members and staff on the Hill to have a discussion about that.
Alan?
Hello, Alan Gelb, Center for Global Development. Thank you for a very interesting and quite exciting presentation. It's nice to see such refreshing thinking about Africa. I have two questions. One goes back to the relationship between the political and the economic aspects of development. As you pointed out, Africa's moved forward in democratic governance, and now we see, though, some countries, I won't name them, but economically quite successful. The donors consider them as economically well-managed and successful, but with an increasingly entrenched government and concern about political backsliding. As you've described it, the strategy sounds very economic and business-driven. How do these fit together? Is there a differentiation between how you see some of these countries and how you see some of the other countries? And how does the political dimension, if it does, affect what you want to do on the economic side? The other question is on implementation. You mentioned the difficulties of implementation, and as you know, there's increasing interest among development partners in results-based assistance, where funding is tied very directly to observed results on the ground. Does this form a significant part of your thinking? And if so, how do you plan to implement that in the sectors that you're working on? Thank you.
Maybe, Michael, on that question, the first one about governance. I glanced through the excellent strategy, and there's really no reference to the MCC, maybe because of the emphasis on trade and other instruments for development and growth. And there's no reference to the multilateral banks either. And all of these MCC and the banks have struggled with this issue of democracy and governance. And the European Union, which is a huge donor, I don't want to go back to talking only about aid, but that's kind of sometimes where the rubber hits the road on these difficult trade-offs.
So first, I should make clear, because I think I mentioned that the Sub-Saharan Africa strategy has 4 pillars, and I was only going to talk about the trade and investment pillar. So by no means should that be interpreted as ignoring the peace and security, and the governance and democracy elements of that strategy. It was merely meant to keep you here for only a half hour rather than 2 or 3 hours. So those are absolutely critical elements of this, and I think you'll find in other remarks that the President, the Secretary of State, others have made about the strategy, or will be making about the strategy, that it's treated in great depth as well. I think, and let me just perhaps combine your point with Nancy's. The MCC, I think we believe, has created a very important process for evaluating countries and working with countries who want to go through political as well as economic reform. And in fact, the Partnership for Growth, which we launched as part of the PPD, builds on the MCC analysis. We take the MCC analysis as sort of the baseline and then put further screens and further work on top of that. So we very much embrace the MCC approach and see it as a critical part of our overall development strategy. You refer to some countries where their progress on economic reform has not been matched equally by their progress on political reform, and you're absolutely right, there are a number of cases out there. And our approach has been to be equally frank on both tracks, and to talk about the importance of democracy and of political reform, of human rights, of pluralism, of transparency, of accountability, as well as to talk about the importance of creating the broader enabling environment for trade and investment, and in fact to link the two, and that ultimately what happens in that first track will have an impact on the second track. I'd point specifically to Kenya as one example, where violence in the last election not only had an unnecessary and tragic human cost, but imposed a serious financial cost on the Kenyan economy and on the perception of Kenya by outside investors. They have another very important election coming up next year, and I think they are keenly focused, and this is a point we made publicly and privately when we were there, keenly focused on the importance of that election being managed in a sufficiently transparent way to avoid and mitigate the impact of any violence that might break out. And so those two things, as you mentioned, cannot be separated and are really two sides of the same coin.
Okay, so we only have 10 minutes. What about if I collected several questions,
your hands.
And then you can pick and
Absolutely.
choose? Okay, this gentleman in the blue shirt had his hand up quite early, and then we'll go to the back.
Thank you. I'm Chris Baltrop, retired Foreign Service from USAID. My last post was managing the financial sector component of the Africa Global Competitiveness Initiative. I worked with a lot of the countries that you're talking about. My question to you is, what level of flexibility do you expect this program to have? And the reason I say that is that in AGCI financial sector, we focused on helping reformers succeed, which meant we got a request for assistance from a central bank. We would then go out there, we'd meet with them, we'd make sure we understood exactly what they wanted, we'd work with the mission to make sure that the mission was in agreement with what we wanted to do and what they wanted to do made sense. That resulted in an MOU. We then mobilized people through a contractual vehicle we had. In Rwanda, for example...
I think we should try to,
In Rwanda, the time that we had from agreement to mobilizing somebody in the field, working in the central bank, was 8 days. Nigeria took a little longer, that was 14 days.
So please ask your question because we're so...
My question is, if you want to help reformers succeed, it's got to be very, very responsive, and the lengthy contractual process and MCC process doesn't work in that environment. So how much flexibility do you see going into the program?
Okay, somebody in the back.
Hi, my name is Amaka. I work here at the Center for Global Development. One of the things you talk about a lot is on trade. And I guess one of the big issues with US-Africa trade relations is that of the subsidies, and particularly the agricultural subsidies and how they adversely affect some African countries. So I wanted to understand, what you're doing about it or what the policy is towards that.
Yeah, Michael will remember us coming and going on and on about duty-free quota education, duty-free quota-free access for all least developed countries. Let's go again, way to the back. I'm sorry, I have to be a little random about this.
Hi, I'm Patricia Brooks. I'm with ActionAid, and I actually wrote out my question so I would be concise. We actually have someone right now who's visiting a Feed the Future site and tweeting about it at ActionAid USA, and seeing all the success that has been brought about. And one of the factors of that success was the basis on the Rome principles, and taking the realistic view that you mentioned on basing today's gains are not lost tomorrow. How do you hold corporations and other investors responsible to the Rome principles, and is there a setup for how that will be done?
Do you know what the Rome principles are?
Yeah.
Should we do one more?
Sure.
Great.
Thank you. My name is Bing Ruan with Hong Kong Phoenix TV. I want to ask about China. This month China offered 20 billion loan to Africa. How much are you concerned about the so-called neo-colonialism threat from China? Thank you.
Okay. Why don't you try those, and we'll see if we can do one more round.
Okay.
That leaves you the option of leaving some out if you want to hear more
I'll
questions.
try not to. Let me take some combination of these. On agriculture, there's currently legislation being worked on with regard to the Farm Bill. It's right in the midst of the legislative process, so it's impossible to predict exactly where it's going to come out. But let me go back to repeat something I said in my remarks. I think subsidies are important. I think tariffs are not unimportant. But I think when a truck full of tomatoes is rotting at the border, or where it takes a month to get something through the port, one of the ports in East Africa, these are not the major obstacles to Africa's agricultural productivity and expansion and exports. We have a lot of on the ground, to Nancy's point, implementation efforts that we can take to reduce barriers at the border, make the soft infrastructure more efficient, help with trade facilitation, and help get product from farm to market to port to the global economy. And to me, that's a lot of things that we can do, again, not necessarily with a lot of money, but with a lot of political will in the short and medium term. With regard to the Rome principles and the other principles that have been laid out there to help define the L'Aquila Initiative and other food security initiatives, we have developed a follow-up process for the new Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition that will bring together donors, countries in the region, the multilateral institutions, and the private sector, very much focused on ensuring that those principles are enforced and are implemented. And a lot of what we've tried to do in since L'Aquila was about bringing the world's attention back to food security and mobilizing a significant commitment by donors. But it was also about working with other donors to change the way we do business. In our PPD on global development, we talked about, and this goes back to a question I think that Alan raised that I didn't answer, results orientation, results-based work, managing, measuring what the effectiveness is and managing to those measurements, but also aligning our assistance behind country-owned plans. And that's a key part of implementing these principles as well. To the gentleman's point, I don't have a great answer on what procurement rules will apply there. We are trying to be flexible and responsive. I was impressed on this trip, and when a central bank governor says incredibly positive things about a USAID agricultural mission. Now, if you haven't been a former Treasury official,
is this Benno and Do? Where are
this was in Nigeria.
Nigeria, okay.
But when he went, very complimentary of USAID and how it's doing business on the ground in Nigeria in a sector outside of the financial sector, in food security. To me, it sort of demonstrates that good things are happening on the ground and that we're getting it right more often than not. So we heard very positive things from a wide range of stakeholders on the ground, and not always from the most obvious sources. And then finally on China, we work with China on obviously on issues where we have common interests. We work to cooperate with China. We have a very good relationship where we work through issues. We have, with regard to Africa, with regard to development, we probably have more potential to engage with China about best practices in terms of how to engage in the region and ensure that we're each pursuing our efforts to support development in a region in a way that supports the people, gives them training, gives them opportunity, and creates the appropriate sustainable infrastructure for economic growth and development. But we don't see China as a threat. We see it as a potential partner with whom we hope we can work towards common principles of how development should work.
Shall we take 5 more minutes, or
sure.
One quick round of questions? Okay, there was, yes, there.
2017 deadline. My question is, I don't think we can wait in terms of a GO enhancement, a GO improvement, whatever we want to call it, because it takes 2 years to pass legislation in Congress. A GO expires in 2015. So I hope to work with other people, but what you work is much more important. And the question is, can we begin to develop our ideas for a GO enhancement over the next 6 months, so we will have something we can present to the new Congress, and we can then spend the next 2 years to renew it? Because if we wait until 2015, there's not enough time, because that's when the next House comes in and it expires. So that's very specific questions, and I thank you so much for going to Africa. You're the first NSC director who did that, and we give you credit, but it was more than 2 days, so we thank you.
Yes, good morning. Fred Berger with the Lewis Berger Group, an implementing partner, so let me try and really bring this down to the implementation level. Over the last 2 years, places like Myanmar and Haiti have demonstrated that we often get serendipitous opportunities to mobilize assistance to the country. And we go in and you may not agree, but I think we're not as well organized going in as we would like to be. It's not surprising that Zimbabwe is going to flip soon, and we know Zimbabwe is important in food security in Southern Africa. At least it was, and it should be able to be again. Is your shop the home of where we're putting together the game plan for going in and assisting Zimbabwe when it transitions? And more importantly, how can we, the private sector implementing partners, help inform your game plan so that we're ready to mobilize at the same time you are as soon as the opportunity opens?
Yeah, I like this question because it reveals the confusion in the development community about who is accountable. Where do we go sometimes? Is it USAID? Is it State Department? Is it the White House on emerging challenges, let's say? Alexis has a question. glad she's going to ask, I think.
Hi, my name is my name is Alexis, so I work here at the center. You mentioned earlier the recent discovery of natural gas in offshore Tanzania, and I was curious, based on your recent trip there, what work, if any, is going on underway to address the potential natural resource curse? Thanks.
Shall we leave it at that?
Sure. Sure. Well, thank you. I think on the point on AGOA, certainly we don't intend to wait until 2015 to begin thinking about this. So if you have ideas, feel free to provide them to us through USTR or ourselves or whoever else you're engaging with. We all talk to each other, which is kind of nice, and we'll make sure that they get incorporated into that. And to a certain degree, that's my answer to the Zimbabwe question as well, which is
the whole of government.
Yes, I mean we really are working this way, and so whether it's through USAID or state or the Africa Directorate at
that was not purposeful.
At the NSS or our development group at the NSS, you should feel free to engage with any or all of us because we'll all be involved in such an issue when it arises.
The new whatever it is telescope they were talking this morning on the radio about the black hole, but we don't have a black hole of development.
I think you have multiple ports of entry, and as I said again, the good news is we all talk to each other pretty frequently. So you should feel free to come and speak to any of us. And finally, on natural gas and the offshore finds, I think this is one of the most critical issues that the continent faces. Frankly, I think natural gas is one of the most critical issues facing the international community, and very much including the United States, because of its potential to be a relatively inexpensive, relatively clean fuel and relatively plentiful fuel. It's so important that we get the environmental piece correct and make sure that it can be developed in a responsible manner. And with regard to places in Africa, to make sure that they're putting in place the regulatory regimes around transparency and regulation to avoid the elements of the resource curse that we've seen in other countries. I think the good news is they are so keenly aware of this. And if you take a country like Tanzania, every leader, every government official we spoke with totally gets it, totally wants to do the right thing, and totally wants the help of the U.S. and others in helping them achieve that objective, whether it's U.S. firms that are helping them map and develop and explore their resources, to the U.S. government, to USAID and the Commerce Department and others who can help provide legal assistance and work on the enabling environment, work on the transparency environment. There is a great will to get this done right, and I think they very much understand the opportunity they have before them.
Michael, just on that last issue, I'm very sorry that Todd Moss, who's our vice president, you know very well, and is a specialist on Africa, he has a project that Alexis is interested in, I'm interested in several others. It's called Oil to Cash. So maybe we'll try to find a way. The idea is that governments like Tanzania might take some portion of the net income that they accrue from these discoveries and distribute it directly to people along the lines that Alaska has done, though in a slightly different form, and that the concept is to create accountability of that government to its people by clarifying to the people what's going on. The other thing that occurred to me when you were talking, because of Alan's question about the infrastructure issue, is why not work out something inside the East African community members at least, that you're supporting on trade facilitation through infrastructure improvements, pay on measured reductions in the time it takes for a truck to get from one place to another. That would be signal a results orientation. It would signal the kind of support for trade through infrastructure that we've all been sort of hammering on, including in the G20 context where the multilateral banks were encouraged to get on with it with infrastructure, and where the African Development Bank has been very important. I know we have a lot of bloggers and tweeters out there. I hope that you will all find ways to disseminate to the larger community, foreign policy, development community, the security community, the really good vision that's embodied in what Michael said today, that development is about more than assistance. It includes assistance, of course, but that fundamentally it's about growth and equal opportunity, governance, the tough issues. And I hope that all of you will also follow in the next years what happens on the implementation side, independent of what happens in our own elections this fall. Could you all give a hand to Michael?